All right, so we are back with Dr. Garner. This is his last clinic of the week. This was actually the first one we planned, though. Last year, after he did his clinic, there was great demand for a story time with Dr. Garner. And so that's what this is going to be. When I first told him, he thought I meant like to read a story, I think. This is for you to tell stories. And so I'm calling it 80 years in music education, and he reminded me that he did not start being a band director when he was 12. However, he did start playing the flute around that time. And so it's actually, I think, 81 years. He said he started in 1942.
Well, that's what, we started in 7th grade in those days.
Yep.
And that's, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. But that's where we got the 80 years of music education. He's going to start from when he started in band. So just to kind of set the stage, in 1942 was the Battle of Midway. World War II was going, not quite halfway through. This was before D-Day. The draft age was lowered from 21 to 18. White Christmas from Bing Crosby first appeared in the movie Holiday Inn. The typical American house cost $3,775. A new car, $920, and a movie ticket, 30 cents, and a loaf of bread, 9 cents.
Let me add this. If you were under 14, it was 11 cents to get in the movie at Amarillo, except at the Liberty Theater, and it was 9 cents there.
Whoa.
When I first came to band camp here, they still had a dollar theater that we would go to. It was a one of our big events one night was to go to the dollar theater. And then last but not least, I thought this was interesting, the U.S. military developed duct tape in 1942. So, Dr. Garner, you're going to come sit right here.
Oh, yes,
So, welcome, Dr. Garner. So, first, if you'll tell us a little bit about memories from beginning band, such as how many kids were in your program, how often did you meet, did the flutes meet with other instruments, how many band directors did you have, that kind of thing.
And what was your first instrument?
There you go.
Okay, well, let me start with this. There was no way I was going to be in band. I was part, some of you have heard this till you're sick of it, and I apologize for telling it again, but I was part of a really tight three little guy group. Dick Brooks and Betty Bruckner were the other two. We were inseparable. Well, we got to the we graduated from the 6th grade at Margaret Wheels School and went to Sam Houston, then junior high, of course. And Dick and Benny got in band, I didn't. And they started, the school was already underway. They were leaning on me really hard to join band. No, I don't want to do that. But finally, they got one of them on each arm and twisted its arm. I said, okay. So with great reluctance, I got in the band. So I went to see Mr. Eads, the band director, and I said, you got anything I could play? He said, well, the only thing I got left is this baritone sax. Here it is. And I went, because it was about way bigger than I was. I said, okay. And so I was taking that thing home. We all rode bikes to school in those days. They had a girl's bicycle rack and a boy's bicycle rack. And anyway, I would take that home. It was probably close to a mile from school, on my bike and practice it and take it back. The only problem was it was so unwieldy. I'd have a wreck or two on the way each direction. And after a while, I was, covered with scabs. Bike wasn't faring very well, neither was the very sax, so I couldn't practice it. And after a while, Mr. Eads could tell I'd come to a standstill. He said, you got to start practicing, or you can't be in band anymore. By now, I liked band. So I went home and I said, Daddy, we need to buy an instrument. That was no small thing in those days. Times were hard. He said, what do you want to play? I said, I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. So I looked around the next day and the smallest thing I saw was the flute. So I went home and said, I want to play the flute. We went down to Tolzien's Music Store on Polk Street and bought a flute, and I became a flute player. And I fell in love with it instantly. And I had my eye on a girl in the percussion.
Watch out now. Watch out.
No, I'm going to try to be careful. Oh, I'm throwing caution to the winds. Forget it. I'll tell you this much. Her name was Helen. And Helen was pretty much out of my league, but I was very attracted to her. Well, we didn't have a band room. We met on the stage, first period every morning, the beginning band. And somehow I'd learned to play a chromatic scale pretty quickly. So one day before band started, I'm standing up where the flute section is, and I played. These words are burned in my memory. She's back there filling the snare drum, and she looked up and said, "Hey, flute, do that again." And I thought, whoa, she noticed me. She thinks my name is Flute, but she This is the way you get chicks. It's the chromatic scale. So that is my first really vivid memory from those days. And no one answered your question. Assistant band director, what is that? Team teaching, forget it. And you know, as I told you before, the band directors were trained to be band directors in those days. They were. My band director, well, Mr. Eads the first year, he was actually a choir director, and then Mr. Rowe came in the next year, so I had him in 8th grade through high school, actually. Did that answer all your questions?
Yes, that's
Okay.
great. And so moving forward, memories from
This is, she said, it was during the war, so there were no contests. The first time we had contests was the war wasn't quite over yet, but they did have contests down at some college in Canyon, Texas, as I recall. And that was my 9th grade year. I played a solo, and I played a flute trio, the French clock, with Nelma Doris Gilbreth and Billy Faye Pickett. Whatever happened to them, I don't know, but certainly a vivid memory and a very pleasant one. I guess those are my chief junior high memories. Well, another one was Paul Mathis was a good buddy of mine. He was a year ahead of me. He was an incredible trumpet player and an amazing pianist. His mother, was a piano teacher. They lived at 120 Wayside in Amarillo. And Paul started this kid dance band. And in an assembly program one time, they played Stormy Weather, and I was, oh, wow, I want to be a part of that. But they didn't have any flutes. So I told my dad, Daddy, I want to buy a saxophone. And he called his friend Gordon Kramer, who was a real estate salesman, but also played saxophone in a local dance band, pretty good player. And Gordon said, okay, go to Ratton and White down on 6th Street, it's been going for a while now, and buy a Busher Aristocrat and get a Brillhart 3-star mouthpiece. So we got a Busher Aristocrat saxophone and a Brillhart 3-star mouthpiece. And so excited. I honked around that thing all day, until on a Saturday, I think. And, I had no instruction, but it was kind of like a flute, 6 fingers and all that. I could do a little bit on it. And I was having such fun. I had no idea how to form a proper embouchure. I was using a double embouchure, with the upper lip over the teeth as well, and biting pretty hard. And so anyway, I had great fun with it all day. And before I went to bed, I thought, okay, I've got to play a little bit on Betsy here. You know about Betsy. I couldn't make a sound. My lips were swollen up so much. I could not make a sound. And I started, sobbing. Take it back. And my dad said, relax, let's see how it is tomorrow. He was a very wise guy, by the way. A smart guy. Wise guy is another connotation. So the next morning, man, I woke up, I jumped out of bed and I grabbed Betsy. And it was okay. So I kept the saxophone. Later on, Paul let me, took some lessons from Gordon Kramer, this guy, which were very helpful. And Paul let me sit on a rehearsal of his kid dance band one time at his house. Oh, and I was in heaven. And after it was over, I'll never forget him coming to me and sort of gently saying, Gary, you don't have to tongue everything. But I got pretty decent later on. And then I found out, I was playing in a second-rate band, and it was an adult band in Amarillo, making a little money. Union scale, you had to belong to union, was $2.50 an hour. So if you had a 3-hour job, $7.50, $10 for a 4-hour job. That was big bucks in our book, my book. And but then, this goes on into high school. I found out you had to play clarinet because all the saxophone bars had clarinet parts. So I went down to the Amarillo Band House on 5th Street in Amarillo and bought an old metal clarinet for $30, and it was curved about like this. I think somebody must have said on it. I got a fingering chart, and I was so bummed. This is the way you finger D on the saxophone and D on the clarinet, on the flute. The G, come on. You know what, saxophone, clarinet, of course, has a register key, not an octave key. That was horribly confusing to me for a while, but I finally got used to it. Okay, that's the end of the junior high stuff.
There's something in the notes about telling jokes with the band. Did you?
Oh, that was not a habit in those days.
Okay.
It's a habit now.
Later.
Not a good one.
So then you went to Texas Tech and you started major.
Okay.
Your first major.
Yeah, well, so that summer before graduation, after graduation, I was now a high school graduate. This had been the summer of 1948. I was playing out at the Club Victoria on what is now Amarillo Boulevard, which is known as Northeast 8th. It was a small band, rhythm section, and 4 front line. 3 saxes. The leader was a saxophone player, Kay Carter. And the trumpet player was Roy Bogert. He was really old, about 25, I think. And I looked up to him so much. He was a great player and a great guy. We were quite good friends. And so at intermission one night, he said, "Hey, you're a graduate from high school now. What are you going to do?" I'd already gone to North Texas. I was going to be my ideal. I was going to be the white Charlie Parker. I had half of it down pat already. The Charlie Parker thing, I don't think that would ever happen. I idolized him then and I idolize him now and always will. So I had gone down to North Texas because I heard they had a big jazz program, and they did. And I talked to Gene Hall, the guy that ran the lab bands there. I played for the flute teacher. I guess I played for him, at least I talked with him, George Morey. And that was all set. So Roy said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm going to North Texas, major in music." And Roy said, "You don't want to do that." I said, "What?" I still can't believe anybody was this naive except I was. He said, "You don't want to do that." I said, "Well, Jay, Roy, what would I do?" And he said, "I started off as a music major at SMU. I hated it, got out of it, switched to marketing. Best decision I ever made." "What would I do?" He said, "Geology. There's a big need for geologists right now." I said, "Okay." There was a guy in Lubbock. I played in his band in Amarillo a few times. Named, anybody remember? It'll come to me in just a moment. C.A. Rogers. He used Russ Rogers for his professional name. But I'd played for him a few times in Amarillo. He had moved to Lubbock. He had a band at the Cotton Club. And he'd call me a time or two, urging me to come to Lubbock and play in his band. But, I was going to North Texas. Well, now that I was going to be a geology major, incidentally, I hated math and science, and it hated me back. I'm going to be a geology major? Come on. And so I called CA. I said, "Okay, I'm coming." And played in his band out the Cotton Club. There were some incredible players. One of them was my predecessor, great friend, whose name I think I've mentioned before, Ted Krager. Fabulous trumpet player. He later on played lead in the Jackie Gleason show, by the way. So that tells you something. So I think I told you I promptly failed 10 hours at Tech, and that's how I became a very reluctant music major. But you know the rest of that story. Was there something else I was supposed to say?
No, just you were geology and then you changed back. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't all that good a music student either at first. The theory class with Dr. Blitz, that first year I was a music major, first semester I guess, met at 8 o'clock. It wasn't my time, it still isn't, by the way. And he used to refer to me, quote, as his somnambulist, because I would stay awake maybe the first 5 minutes, and the rest of the time my head's on the desk. So I was his, you know what a somnambulist is? It's a sleepwalker. In fact, I did later become an better maybe than an okay student, but I had to get married and spend 3 years in the Air Force in order to do that. Even made the dean's list.
And that's the next question. How did your years in the Air Force help you prepare for teaching?
Well, I think I told you before what my preparation for. The great thing I had was Mary Jean Van Appledorn, who followed Dr. Blitz and taught me the Eastman County system, much against my will. Thank heavens. But this was during the Korean War, and we were all registered, all the young men were registered for the draft. I went, and by this time, my later bride had enrolled at Tech. She was a year behind me. And played with a girl, Mary Ellen Griffin. I just went out and visited her. So, we were engaged. First time we were together was going out to a marching rehearsal. She was a flute player. Flute was not big with her. She was a marvelous pianist. She had perfect pitch, great musician. Flute was kind of a very secondary thing with her, but she was in the flute section. And the first time together was going to a marching rehearsal, which is well removed from the old band building. And I don't know, we were going in some friend's car, and like the gentleman I was trying to be, I let her get in the back door before I closed the door. Only problem was she was fully in, but her new Haynes flute was not. Oh. I closed the door on the head joint, and it looked like this. Oh. Not a very good start to a relationship, but somehow it survived. Anyway, we had become engaged. I went down to the draft board and found that I was due to be called up in a month, and we were going to get married that following summer. So I thought, oh man, that's not good. There was Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock at that time, well, outside Lubbock actually. And so I went out to Reese to see if they had an opening for a flute player, and to my great fortune, they did. I got the gig, and he gave me a letter, the band leader, to take the basic training in Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, which would assure that I would be stationed in Lubbock on the completion of basic training. So I was in Lubbock, and somehow at Reese Air Force Base, I was violating the rules. I'm a little embarrassed about this now, but I was keeping my saxophone playing a big secret, because I was still playing in town and making good money, which was not supposed to do. But the worst musician in the entire band, I know his name, but I won't repeat it, turned me in to the band leader. And he immediately put me in charge of the dance band, which I was not happy about, but it was very good fortune. I was writing a lot of arrangements for the dance band and rehearsing the dance band. We had a weekly radio show called Wings Over Lubbock, and he also made me, I don't know why, assistant leader, whatever that meant. I think I did a few section rehearsals. I may have even directed a band a time or two. But those experiences, the morale in that band was horrible because of the band leader who, well, here, I guess it's all right to tell this since I won't reveal his name. He said to me one day, Garner, I'm thinking about moving Johnson from alto sax to baritone sax. Are those two instruments figured anything alike? I said, yes, sir, pretty much. And there was another time I recall when he got mad at the clarinets because he thought they were playing out of tune. I'm sure they were. There were some good clarinet, one great clarinet player. And he had a really terrible temper. He said, clarinets, if you had used the correct embouchure, you wouldn't even need those barrels. So that tells you a bit about him. The morale, as I said, was, in addition to ignorance, terrific, hair trigger temper. But I never thought I would come to see the day. I did not enjoy that experience at the time. But it finally did happen. I came to look back on it with a great deal of pleasure. I learned a lot, and I had some great friends in there, some wonderful friends. So, does that answer that?
Yes. Tell us about working at Thompson Hayward Chemical and the benefits of that job.
Okay, well, I got an early out. The Korean War had ended. I was in on a 4-year enlistment, as we all were. And I got out. If you had, after the war ended, if you had 2 years of service and of active duty behind you, if you were a non-essential career field, which band was, and if you wanted out, which I sure did, you got an early out, so I did get an early out. And I served just under 3 years. I went in January of 50, I got it in October of 53. So I came home. My wife had a good friend who was the head of the placement department at Texas Tech, Dorothy Pajan. And I got home. I'd been a civilian for a matter of minutes. She said, "Hey, I've got a job interview for you." She talked to Dorothy, said, "Well, I need somebody out at Thompson Hayward Chemical Company," which is out by at that time was out by the airport in Lubbock. So I went out there. I took off my uniform, put on my Civic, and I guess probably hadn't been a civilian much more than an hour. But I'm out there interviewing with Max Stripling, wonderful guy, for a job at Thompson Hayward. Now, it was a one-man operation. It was a chemical company. I think it's still in existence. And Max wanted somebody that would answer the phone and sweep out keep the warehouse clean. And I thought, well, I could probably do that. And I said, I guess I'd been there maybe a matter of a few days. I did have a lot of extra time, and so I asked him, would it be okay if I get everything done, if I could practice my instrument? I said, sure. So I spent a lot of time practicing there at Thompson Hayward. I cannot tell you the great affection that I had and have, the memory of Max Stripling, but thinking about him rather recently, I looked him up, and he's no longer with us. So sad about that, but it's part of life, I guess. But here's another thing. After my sophomore year in high school, I and 3 of my AH buddies went to the Texas Tech band camp, and if you can believe it. Now, my band director, Mr. Rowe, had played in a clarinet in a Hardin Simmons Cowboy Band, which at that time was directed by Prof. Wiley, as he was known. He had since moved to Texas Tech. Well, Mr. Rowe encouraged us strongly to go to their band camp, 6 weeks band camp, which we did. And Kenneth and I, Kenneth Kohler, Billy McGill, and Bobby Robbins were the other 3 guys. We were great friends. And Kenneth and I already had formed this little ocarina duet. I would play the melody on the tonette actually, and he played bass ocarina. And we had all these crazy things going. But the other 2 guys got ocarinas, Bobby and Billy, and we won the talent show. But Kenneth and I kept our duet going. So what we would do, we had an act. We would play these silly little songs and interrupt them. I don't know if you remember Jimmy Durante, probably not. He was a comedian and piano player. And he'd say, stop the music, and he'd tell some bad joke. Well, that's what we did. So we play our duet, stop the music, and tell a bad joke. Well, we were discovered. We were discovered by Mr. Irving Tolzien. Remember I mentioned Tolzien Music Company where we got my first flute. And Mr. Tolzien somehow discovered us and gave us a name. We were now the Musical Misfits. And he took us around the civic clubs all over the Panhandle, took us to the Air Force Base. We had an Air Force Base at that time in Amarillo, and to the VA. And I've got some bad news for you. Look what I brought. Come on, baby. Actually, well, this is not a real tonette. This is a song group, but it'll serve. Does anybody remember the song? This is one of our big hits. If You Knew Susie. Really, yeah, a couple of old hand guys. If you knew Susie like I know Susie, oh, what a girl. I don't, but you don't remember who made it famous.
Jimmy Durante.
Who?
Jimmy Durante.
No.
That was a guess, okay.
Eddie Cantor.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm going to recreate, without Kenneth, I wish you were here. Kenneth died in 2011. He was a pretty distinguished guy. He was a member of the Texas State Legislature for quite a while later in life. So anyway, here's an example of what we would do. Stop the music, stop the music. Did I tell you about old Joe Quattlebaum? No, what about him? We were walking down the street together the other day. A steamroller came along and ran right over him, flattened him out like a pancake. Oh no, what'd you do? Well, I picked him up and rushed him to the doctor's office, but the doctor was out to lunch and the office was closed. Oh my gosh, what'd you do then? Oh, I slipped him under the door. Okay, one more. You shouldn't have acted with such appreciation. So here's your punishment for that. Stop the music. Hey, did I tell you I rode my stick horse all the way from here to New York City? Wow, no kidding. What was that like? Well, I tell you, when I got there, I was so tired, I felt like I'd walked the whole way. I should have told that one first. Well, I can tell you, friends, those were great times. I worship the memory of that, and I wish Kenneth were still here. We resurrected our act for the class, AH class of 1950. They asked us to do that. So well over half a century later. And we hadn't lost a beat. We can still do the whole shtick somehow.
So tell us about your first teaching job, half-time at Hutchison,
Yeah.
or full-time?
Well, as I said, I got out of service in October '53, went to Thompson Hayward, you know all about that. And I went back to school then in January of '54. And the first, I don't know why they had me doing this at that point, but part of what I was doing that semester was student teaching with my good buddy, Ted Krager, the trumpet player, Jackie Gleason Show, you remember all the rest, and department head and band director at WT. So anyway, I was student teaching with Ted. He was a master teacher as well as a fantastic musician. But Ted then left that next year to go to Columbia to finish his, put a year in residence on his doctorate. That, I told you all about James Mercer, remember, The Best Way to Learn and all that. Well, that was Edgoff. But they needed a new band director at Hutchinson, and Ted recommended me. And Jay Gordon was the principal, wonderful guy. He said, we can't hire him, he doesn't have a degree. So they hired my great buddy, O.T. Ryan. I know at least a couple of you would know that name. O.T. had been a junior high band director in Plainview and done an incredible job there. So Lubbock hired him away. People in Plainview were not happy about it. So they later upped the salary to the point, his salary to the point, he said, okay, I'll stay. And now the Hutchinson job is open and it's very late in the year. They couldn't find anybody. So I'm out in my garage, our garage at 3220 one day fooling around with something, and suddenly in the garage appears Mr. Gordon, the principal. He said, do you still want that Hutchinson job? I said, boy, yeah. He said, well, I know you've got more courses to take to finish your degree, so you can teach half day and then go to school half day. So the first year I taught half day. Had three bands, A band, B band, C band. A band was the top band, B band was the second band, C band was the beginning band. So that's how I became the band director at Hutchinson, and next year, of course, it became a full-time job.
You were the only director there.
Pardon?
Were you the only director there?
What do you say?
Okay. So just kind of, the reason I'm asking that is because now it's easy to think that everybody has what we have in Texas, and not only is that not even around the U.S., but it certainly was not the case.
You know what drives me nuts? I see so many people with assistant directors around. Assistant directors are essentially doing nothing sometimes, often, when the rehearsal's going on. They ought to be down there in the mud with them, you know, playing their instrument, whatever. But so often it's strolling around and providing no help at all, really.
It also seems like sometimes now there's 3 directors and one person's only going to teach woodwinds and one person's only going to teach brass. And I come from the philosophy of you're a band director and you teach everything. And so I hope that if things keep going where there's more and more, that's great for music education. But I hope people continue to learn all the instruments and teach all.
You won't be surprised to know I agree with that wholeheartedly.
So I have told a couple people this, and they don't believe me, so I'm going to ask Dr. Garner. Tell us what contest was like, and if marching and concert contest were ever combined.
Well, contest in those days was contest. It was in the spring, and it included not only concert and sight reading, but marching as well. Marching was not in the fall. They did all 3. This may sound a little boastful. I apologize if it does. I hope not. But now, my first year as a full-time band director, the Lubbock administration, in their wisdom, decided contests were indefensible educationally. So we didn't get to go to contest, but they changed their mind, and next year we did. Probably a good thing for me. This is a little aside. I had deluded myself into thinking, hey man, I'm a pretty hot band director. There were 4 junior highs in Lubbock, and the band I had was by far the best. Not taking into account that it was by far the best clientele, and that I had inherited a group taught by a master teacher. But this was a revelation to me like I still can't believe. I and a couple of my friends, I think, went down to the contest in Odessa. In comes Gene Smith's Crockett Junior High Band. They played his honor march in about 30 seconds, I think. I was in the depths of despair. Oh, my God, my band could hold a candle to that. Here comes Bill Dean's Bowie Junior High Band. It was phenomenal. And oh gosh. But then here came J.R. McIntyre's Bonham Junior High Band. I mean, I really was depressed to the max. But it was a very good experience for me. That's when I realized, hey man, you're not much of a band director at all. And you had no idea what kids these age could do. But now I did. And I think that helped me become a much better band director. So, second year we got to go to contest. My principal at this time, Mr. Gordon, was gone, and now is Bill Howarth, who was an ex-football coach. And we became good friends. We played golf some together. And Mr. Howarth said this to me not on more than a few times. Boy, it must be great to be a band director. Everybody wins. So I got a little sick of hearing that, actually. So we went to contest in Levelland. There were 37 bands there. This became known as the Year of the Bloodbath. There were first divisions made by Plainview, of course, by not Big Spring, by Sundown, and by Littlefield with Burl Harris. Sundown was Rex Shelton, and by a certain junior high, Hutchinson Junior High. And we got the kids after the marching part of it. This was in the Lubbock paper. 4 of my kids, Billy Markham, not this matters to you, Billy Markham, Kilmer Key, Philip Eubanks, and Rucker Barrett, all no longer living, were carrying me off on their shoulders, and I'm holding our sweepstakes plaque. I went into office Monday, principal's office, Mr. Howard's office on Monday morning, and I put that plaque on there and said, well, Mr. Howard, there were 4 bands out of 37 to make a sweepstakes. We're one of them. Must be great to be a football coach. Every time you take the field, you got a 50% chance of winning. I can't tell you how I've savored that moment. So I had gotten a little better, but mostly as a result of that experience in Odessa. when I realized what kids could really do with some good teaching. Uh-oh, here comes a Mike Watts question. I'm afraid of this.
Now, while we're elaborating just a little bit, are those the days where in one day you did marching, concert, sight reading, solo ensemble, inspection?
Yep. Yeah, inspection. So you made a 1 in concert, sight reading, and marching. Inspection was part of marching. You made a 1 in those other 3, but you didn't make a 1 in inspection. No sweepstakes for you.
So explain, like, the band shows up at 8 o'clock or something, and they march, and then they walk off the field and
Well,
sit down and
inspection is
play?
before you march.
Okay.
And, you know, they check to be sure all the instruments are clean and all the uniforms are spotless. And it was normally pretty strict.
And then you march, and then was it?
Oh, marching is the last thing of the day.
Okay, so inspection, then they sit down and play.
No, no, you play earlier in the day. The concert and sight reading is earlier in the day.
But it's all one day.
Oh, yes, all one day.
And then do you at the
And
end
the
of
junior high bands march in those days, always.
And at the end, and did the high school do the same thing?
Sure.
All in one
Oh,
day?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then you get if you get a trophy, you get it at the end of the day?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you get carried out on the shoulders of the students. All right. So moving ahead.
We got a question.
Was
Oh,
it
yep.
military style marching?
Well, what was really new in those days was marching to the yard lines. We all, in that region, all doing 8-5. 6-5 began at Massillon High School in Massillon, Ohio, invented by a guy named George Red Bird. His nickname was Red, everybody called him Red. Why this hadn't happened before, I don't know, but he figured out, hey, those yard lines aren't there for the referees of the football team, they're there for the band. I think he got out his calculator and divided 30 inches into 5 yards, 30 inches being the standard military stride, and guess what number came up? 6. Hey, we can hit that yard line every 6. And believe me, the test of a marching band prior to that had been, how straight are the lines? And the answer was usually not very or not at all. And I can so well remember, I don't know who did 8-5. I don't know where that came from, but we were all marching 8-5. Somebody figured out, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could hit the yard line on the beginning of every phrase? That would require a 22.5-inch step. And so, yeah, we were marching the yard line. But I so well remember, we could march. I went on then for 1 year to Monterey High School. We had 72 in a marching band. And we marched in a company front down the field, 8-5, and the lines where you could look like you drew them with a ruler. It was not all that hard to do. And the crowd, at first, the crowd would go crazy. I mean, it was astonishing to see a long line, sideline to sideline, and the line is straight, unimaginable. So it was quite a deal.
So because of time, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to some I think it was WT stories. Can you tell us about Tom Dillon and his hand position?
Tom Dillon, you wouldn't guess it from the name, is Japanese. And Tom is from Clovis. Wonderful flute player. Norval Howell used to refer to him as a kamikaze flute player. Tom's mother, had married an American service man, Air Force guy that was stationed in Japan. And so he took his last name of Dillon. And then they were later transferred to Clovis. And he came over here as a flute major. He was an amazing player. But I noticed, and I was teaching flute, of course, and Tom was really good, but his fingers were flying up in the air. I can't even do it, but did it. And I said, Tom, try to get those fingers down. It's not something you can just turn a switch off and on and change that, of course. And I recalled my buddy Randall Rayleigh, who was the orchestra director at Hutchinson, where I was the band director. And he was a really good violinist, but he had started his life as a country fiddle player on a farm outside of Abilene. And I guess became a pretty good country fiddle player, but as country fiddle players do, everything is in first position, elbow is out here, and the instrument's down here on his chest. But he decided, I'd really like to learn to play violin, so he signed up for some lessons with the then principal player in the Abilene Symphony. And first thing he did was make him bring that elbow in, and that was very hard. So Randy, being Randy, got a coat hanger and sharpened it up to a fine edge, mounted one end on the scroll, the other end on the bout, so if his arm came over like this, it would cut him pretty badly. And he learned right away not to do that. So with that in mind, I told Tom, told him that story. I wish I could figure out a way to mount something over the flute and put little pins over it. Well, Tom came to his next lesson, and whoa, it was perfect. I'd never seen anybody make that change like that. I was astounded and thrilled. I said, whoa, Tom, how'd you do that? And he said, now Tom, being a native Japanese speaker, that articles, A, N, and D in the English language didn't much exist for him. He said, I do what you say. I said, what? And it turned out Tom had figured out a way to do that. He had some little pins down on them. And then I looked at his fingers. Every one of them had a little scab. That's the story you wanted?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so when you came to WT, what was it like when you arrived? What were your duties? There were far less faculty. What kinds of
Oh, I
things?
was the third wind faculty. Gerald Hemphill was teaching all the brass. Roy Durkin was teaching all the woodwinds. So when and the percussion. So when I came, I was doing the band, of course, and I was doing all the woodwinds except for clarinet. Roy was still teaching clarinet. Then the third year, we added 2 new positions, and that's when Don Baird and Dave Ritter came. But I was even teaching music appreciation. Now, we didn't have all that many instrumental majors. I only had 2 flute majors. Randy Vaughn, by the way, was one of them.
He's on right now, too.
Hey, Randy! Randy Vaughn and Jimmy Andrews were the 2 flute majors I had. But we had a real artist player, too, Joe Haddon, who was not a music major, but what a player he was. He was a senior that year. I've got a quick Joe Haddon story. Should I tell that?
Yeah.
So on our first tour, we played Sorcerer's Apprentice, and we toured the Panhandle. Sorcerer's Apprentice, you might know, starts very slow section and fermata, then another very slow section, followed by a fermata, and then da-da-up, 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 just take loud, fast. And so we were playing a concert at Phillips High School, which no longer exists. I wasn't using the score, and somehow the band got to the end of the first slow section, but I was at the end of the second slow section. Second slow section begins with 2 third clarinet players playing a pianissimo octave B flat, Beth Manuel and Marceline Pierce, waiting to do their, but it's my head. So we finish that first slow section, and I go, 1, 2, 3, and Beth and Marceline go, 2. I was filled. At the Christmas concert that year, my first concert, when I gave a downbeat for the last number, nobody played a note. I was beyond furious. But then the band president, some guy named Jeff Doughton, got up out of the saxophone section, brought a beautifully wrapped little Christmas gift that the band had bought me. It was a cigarette lighter. And I thought that's what they were doing again here. I already had a cigarette lighter, I needed another. So I thought, okay, I'll do that again. What? This time Beth and Marceline just looked at me in wonderment. Nobody made a sound. And I said, we're number 2. This is a performance. We're at number 2. And Joe Haddon, first year flute player, looked up and said, we're at number 1. So our next concert was at Borger High School, very close by. And we got there well before the concert when we arrived. And so I stood up and we got there, turned around to the bus, and I said, hey, we got some extra time. Everybody come on and get set. We'll rehearse a little bit. I won't identify who it was, but I know perfectly well. One of my female horn players from the back of the bus said, why don't you just go rehearse conducting? Yeah, it was a memorable moment.
All right, so
But now here's about the band.
Go ahead.
The band, we had some artist players, a few. Joe Haddon, I already mentioned, and of course Randy was a great player. First year clarinet, Len McLarty, they were all from little schools. Len McLarty, our first clarinet, huge talent. He was from Seymour. The first year trumpet player, Gerald Grant, was from Petersburg. They had one all-state band in those days. Gerald Grant had been first chair all-state from Petersburg. He later went on to a stellar career as a trumpet player. Fred Carter was a trombone player. He later played with Stan Kenton. So there was a great talent in that band. But then at the bottom end of the spectrum are some kids that kind of topped out once they got the case open. It was downhill from there. But they were wonderful kids. I still have contact with a lot of them. And they're all so close to my heart, I can't tell you.
So that made me think of, so band camp now, this year is 1,000. It's been 1,000 for a few years. What was band camp like when you first came
Well, I
here?
didn't teach the first 2 years. I was going back to California and finish up graduate work. What was band camp like?
Do you remember, did it have like 2 bands? Did it have 6? Was it 2 weeks?
Well, they had quite a few. Camp was a going concern, but the camp later on almost went out of business. We became known as the camp. We didn't have air-conditioned dorms. The camp where you had to work hard and didn't have air-conditioned dorms. And one of our competitors became known as the camp that had air-conditioned dorms, and you had all these fun activities. And we had been eating their lunch, but all of a sudden they're eating our lunch. Guess who saved the band camp? Mary Ellen Garner. Harry Haynes, in his wisdom, went to her and said, could you devise an activities program for the band camp? And buddy, did she ever. And band camp just took off like a rocket, and we're eating their lunch again.
And she used to handwrite all the name tags as well,
Oh,
calligraphy.
yeah. She had the most beautiful, some of you know this, gorgeous handwriting you have ever seen. She wrote every name tag for every kid.
My very first year at band camp, Mrs. Garner had calligraphied my name on it.
Yep.
All right. Talk to us about, we have about 3 more minutes. Band directors who were your group, your mentors, and how, like Mr. McIntyre, people like that,
Well,
and the Earl Ray Band Company.
Well, JR certainly was. But the big music store in Lubbock at that time was, well, it started off as Adair Music Company. Later on, Earl Ray bought the store, and it was the Earl Ray Band Company on Avenue Q. And the band directors would routinely meet there every Saturday. And among my best buddies, certainly Ted Krager, of course, topped the list, but O.T. Ryan and Rex Shelton and Dub Crane and, several others, Chief Davidson, oh my gosh. We would meet there on Saturdays and just talk band and essentially teach one another what worked and what didn't work.
Did you all bring recordings?
No.
I know in Odessa, there was, I believe they would bring their recordings, Midland or Odessa, and they would play recordings. And
Yeah, no,
talk.
I do not recall that happening. No. That would have been a good thing, though. Sure.
Well, and I think that doesn't necessarily happen a lot anymore, but I feel like at least we have band camp once a year, where we can all get together again. But final thoughts? What do you see as being different? When you look back, what do you
Well, kids are different these days. They're going to be different 10 years from now from what they are now. You know that I didn't say different then. That would be incorrect. Different from. But I've had some really wonderful visits with these 3 high school flute classes that I've been working on. The one thing, I think I've talked about this a little bit, they are so quiet and so well behaved and so receptive and responsive. But still, there are a lot of times I ask a lot of questions, and sometimes some of them will know the answers, but they, I guess, are too embarrassed to say so. There are 1 or 2 exceptions. One girl in particular I can think of, and one boy in particular I can think of. It's not, they're quite different, and I don't mean in a bad way at all, and maybe not even a good way, but just different from what kids used to be. I did do a little survey. Well, I had a little test with them today. This was the honors band. We were working on one of their pieces. I don't remember even what it was, but they were having trouble with a little lick. So I tried 3 different ways with them. I did the solo soli, I did the drill routine, and I did playing and rhythms. And then I asked them, give me a score. What was most helpful, 1 to 10? And they seemed to think that maybe the drill routine was the most helpful. Now, the drill routine, you recall, is maybe we're working on something like that. Okay, so we all do it. And we all do it together. First person does it in rhythm. Everybody, next person, everybody. The consensus seemed to be that was the most helpful. And the reason, what do you think the reason would be? Anybody? What?
Just tons of repetition.
Well, that's a big part of it. And
Individual assessment.
sure, you think their pulse rate might be picking up a little bit? Absolutely. The motivation is sky high. They don't want to embarrass themselves. Or they want to show up everybody else. With these kids, I don't know if that part is a factor or not. But they all, I told them, I just need this information. If any of this stuff is not working well or you don't like it, please tell me. But they thought they were all three of those things were really helpful. The solo, soli, drill routine, and the playing in rhythm. And I knew it helped, but I wanted to know their take on
And how lucky are those flute players that they get to have Dr. Garner? So,
it.
thank you very much.
How lucky am I
Anything
to
else?
have them? You know, honestly, if it were not for music, I don't know what I would be doing. That's all I do, actually. Down in my music dungeon, I'm practicing or done all these little pedagogical things. You've hadn't seen the tip of the iceberg, actually. And done a lot of recording stuff. We're using GarageBand, playing various combinations of flute, clarinet, alto saxon, tenor sax. It's just such fun. Thank you for music, and thank you, Dick and Benny.